call, there's a change.
Right.
Well, this is him too.
Right. We'll call the meeting to order. Invocation first. Tinker Parker, would please stand for the invocation.
Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow closer as a group and nurture the bonds of our community. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we make decisions that affect our county. We seek to represent fairly and well those who have given us this task. Please share a little of your wisdom with us to help us do right by all concerned, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of truth, for the greater glory of you, and for the service of humanity. Thank you for your heavenly blessing. We ask these things in your name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
No problem. Morning.
So morning. Where do I go for detention? Mr. Snipes, you know, right? Thank you. I appreciate it. I guess I would need a roll call, please. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Tripp. Present. Mr. Washington. Present. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Present. Mr. Vickery. Present. Mr. Olthoff. Present. Mr. Hess. Present. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk. Present. Mr. McConnell. Present. Mr. Mulcahy. Present. Mr. Scott. Mr. Snipes. Present. Mr. Byrne. Present. Mr. Seroy. Present. Mr. Lear. Present. Mr. Hildebrand. Present. Mrs. Weber. Present. Mr. Einfeld. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Present. Mr. Payton. Present. Mrs. Parker. Present. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Present. Mr. Kinzinger. Present. Mr. Fairfield. Present. Mr. Wheeler.
Present. We have a quorum. Thank you. Nothing under public commentary today. Have any slips? Communications, presentations. I guess I'll move on to certificates of appreciation. Alex Ramirez, 10 years in the Sheriff's Department. Alex here? Nope. Matthew Roberts, 10 years in the Sheriff's Department. Russ Belcher, 15 years, Sheriff's Department. Nope, that's Tom Latham. Let's see here. Deborah Davis, 15 years in the Circuit Clerk's Office. Siobhan Franklin, 15 years in the Circuit Clerk's Office. And Michael McDormand, 20 years in the Sheriff's Department. Sheriff, would you like to come up and say a few words?
The last one, Mike. The last one.
That's right. Actually, stand in front of me in case somebody shoots. So Mike McDormand joined us way back when. Actually, we kind of almost came in together. We were able to hire Mike in the jail back in the mid-90s, 96, I believe. And so he started his career in the jail after serving our country in the United States Air Force. And he's now at 20, and we have enough people in here. If we can talk him out of retiring next year, it would help us a lot. He does a great job for us. He's been assigned to various functions within our department. We're happy to have him now, and we're going to hate to lose him here in the next year or two. So, Michael, congratulations.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they're good. Thank you. Moving on, minutes of the last meeting from June 12th. I need a motion to approve the minutes. Mr. Snipes?
Yep, I'll make the motion, but I also wanted to just do a call to those in the group that you read probably at work, but I thought for the record, because we don't take, so we can them as well for this service, they use the service.
Sure, we'll do that, I guess. And then, can I get a second for the motion to approve the minutes, Mr. Olthoff? All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to Claims Committee, can I get a motion to approve the claims? Mr. Washington, second, Mr. Payton. Just read them into the record, please.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they have examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants payable out of the funds as follows. The Highway Fund, $222,105.66. All other funds, $379,653.80, for a total for the month of May 2018 of $601,759.46. Out of the General Fund, $1,707,423.14. All other funds, $4,658,706.71, for a total for the month of May 2018 of $6,366,129.85.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on, department reports. Can I get a motion to combine and accept the reports as presented? Mr. Byrne, Mr. Fairfield with the second. Please read those on the record, sir.
The Honorable County Board of Kankakee County, your committee, County Collector's Monthly Report for May 2018. Total cash and investments, $45,019,156.68. The County Treasurer's Monthly Report for May 2018. Total checking accounts and cash, $7,913,539.26. The General Fund deficit of $4,049,029.30. Coroner's Monthly Report for May of 2018. Total calls 104. Coroner's cases 14. 8 autopsies, 8 toxicology, 3 outside autopsies, 0 donations, 0 indigents, 1 x-ray, 59 cremations, 0 incomplete. Total in fees for the coroner for May 2018, $7,680.04. Circuit Clerk's cash book for May 2018. Total disbursed $437,777.53. Recorder's Monthly Report for May of 2018. Disbursement fees paid to the County Treasurer, $110,838.05. County Clerk's Monthly Report for May 2018. Total fees of $31,354.46. Animal Control Monthly Report for May 2018. Total fees $72,160, $229.34 in the IPTIP Building Fund, and 88 total animals handled.
Thank you.
And the monthly resolution for July 2018 total to the county, $42,586.50.
Now, thank you. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Under committee presentations and resolutions, is there anything that needs to be removed and considered separately? Ask a second time, anything needed to be removed and considered separately? Without that, is there a motion to combine and accept the consent agenda? Ms. Dunbar, second. Mr. Stauffenberg. If we could read those in the record, sir. Thank you.
The declaration of highway department equipment as surplus property. The declaration and disposal of surplus and unwanted equipment for the Kankakee County Clerk. Approval of the 2017 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report prepared by outside auditor Smith, Kelling, Dykstra, and Ohm, PC. Adoption of an updated financial policy and procedure. Reappointment of Mel Blanchette to the Ethics Commission. Reappointment of Olatunji R. Akintiyo, MD, to the Kankakee County Board of Health. Holidays to be observed by the offices of Kankakee County for calendar year 2019.
Alrighty, we have a motion and a second. That's a roll call vote, sir, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on under PZA. It's a creation of a Transportation Economic Development Project Coordinator, grant-funded position. Need a motion to approve and waive the reading of the resolution. Mr. Ritter, second. Mr. Vickery. If we could just get the title, if that is the title, I believe.
Creation of a
Okay.
Transportation Economic Development
Thank you.
Project Coordinator position.
All right, discussion. Any questions about this? You should have job descriptions. Many went to PZA about this. Just wanted any general questions about the position. It is grant funded, our portion of it. The county is only paying benefits. And this is to service all of the transportation projects around the county. Excuse me. And then also, if the grant goes away, then the position is reevaluated. But there is also contributions from the enterprise zone, and this will be working with companies like Nucor, like CSL, and anywhere in the county that requires transportation, which most of them do on their expansions. So, any questions? I have a motion and a second. We're spending money, so that will have to be a roll call, please.
Mr. Tripp. Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to finance. The first one is the emergency procurement of paint for the county highway department. Number 138, I need a motion to approve and waive the reading of the resolution. Mr. McConnell, second. Ms. Dunbar. I guess, is there any questions about this? We go into detail we did in committee. All right, I guess that would be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp. Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. The next on the list is the authorizing county board chairman to sign agreements to terminate the lease with the Wolfe County Public Building Commission. I need a motion to waive the reading and a second. Mr. Payton, Mr. Tripp. Any questions about this? This is the last little bit. Mr. Snipes.
I'll just say, give me a little bit of background information as to what we're doing. I know we terminated the thing with the jail, with the lease, not lease, but our partnership with the jail.
No, really, this is the last piece. We did the new agreement with Will County. This original agreement was with the Will County PBC, the Public Building Commission, Will County and Kankakee County. So we did the new agreement. This terminates the old lease and basically disperses the funds. So this is the last piece of the puzzle to finish off what the work we did with Wolfe County. Because currently we're all part of the same agreement, even though that agreement financially ended almost a year ago. So this was the last piece of the puzzle, if you will. So then and they've already passed this in Wolfe County. So it's basically, and I believe the PBC has as well. I can't verify that, but I believe it's already gone before them as well. So, any other questions? Alrighty, that's a roll call vote as well, please.
Mr. Tripp?
Aye.
Mr. Washington? Aye. Mr. Legess?
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Vickery?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Aye.
Mrs. Polk?
Aye.
Mr. McConnell?
Aye.
Mr. Mulcahy? Mr. Snipes?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mrs. Evans?
Aye.
Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker?
Aye.
Ms. Dunbar? Mr. Ritter?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Fairfield? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Motion carries. Once I execute these documents, I'll report back probably to finance that everything is tied up and when we could expect payment and all of that kind of stuff. There are no resolutions for the next two. They are almost not just advisory. They came through committee. We don't need a resolution because we did go through that in committee, and I can't remember. The sheriff is here. We talked about that, but do we put that in the packet, the actual cost? Okay, I apologize for that. I want to say the first item was the purchase of an x-ray machine for the courthouse and repair backup. That one was, I believe, 23, Sheriff? It was like 23,000. So it's not an official motion, it's just authorizing the expenditure of that. It's going to go to capital, the capital budget anyway, so it'll be caught up in our budget amendments. We wanted to bring it in front of the board to make sure everybody approved the expenditure, because the one that we have is on its last leg, no pun intended, but we just wouldn't have gone out and done that. We need a backup. If that thing goes down, then you have to basically not let people in the courthouse. You have to hand wand everybody, I believe. So, but that one was 23, and so I guess we could probably combine the magnetometer for the annex building. This was a not to exceed number based on Tom Latham and Building and Grounds getting, and Wes and the sheriff getting together and finalizing that plan. And that not to exceed number, Tom? It was originally 13,000. So if it comes back more, we'll bring it back here in front of full finance and then bring it back. So it was just to get the ball moving and make sure that everybody was on board. We can't let the probation / public defender's building go unmanned anymore because some of the people were showing up to their meetings with weapons. And the only way they would find them is when they were arresting them on a violation. So that cannot continue, and we need to move on it. So the question is, you know, if there is a price, do you authorize that price? And if it's more, then we come back. Make sense, Mr. Snipes?
Well, I'm certain that their price is based upon some type of proposal they sent out. But I want to clarify the purchase of the x-ray machine for the courthouse and the repair backup. That totality is, or the aggregate amount of both of them are 23,000?
No, I don't believe so.
Or is it just 23,000?
For the new one.
For the new one. We don't know the cost of the repair?
It was 4 or 5 for the repair.
4 or 5?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, that was 4 or 5 for the repair. And then if we come back, you know, if it's more, then we'll come back and let finance know, but you have to have a backup, basically. So, question? So yeah, I would need a motion to combine and approve, I guess. Okay, Ms. Dunbar, second. Mr. Fairfield, any more questions? Since we are spending money at some point, can I get a roll call, please, on that?
Mr. Tripp?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Legess?
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Vickery?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Hess?
Yeah.
Aye.
Mrs. Polk? Mr. McConnell?
Aye.
Mr. Mulcahy?
Aye.
Mr. Snipes?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mrs. Evans? Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker?
Aye.
Ms. Dunbar? Mr. Ritter?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger?
Aye.
Mr. Fairfield? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye, motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to other business. I have one opening on the Kankakee County Board of Health. That is for a county board member. So if anyone's interested, please fill out that application form. It's something I make sure everybody does. Excuse me, without exception, the public or the board. I just want to make sure we have something on file saying you want to do it. But then, yeah, just let me know and we'll put it in. And if there's more than one, then we'll send all of those to executive and let executive make the choice. That's kind of the way I'll look at it. So we have two openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, one opening on the Manteno Drainage District number 3, one opening on the Manteno Drainage District number 9, one opening on the Wilcan Regional Development Authority, two openings on the Essex Township Fire Protection District, and one opening on the Ethics Commission. And that would be for a Democrat, or excuse me, a non-Republican, should I say? Because it could be a Libertarian, Mr. Byrne. It could so it could be, you know, just it can't be from the Republican Party because you have to have a balance on there. So through your bone there, Jim. So moving on, anything under old business anyone wants to cover? Alrighty then, under new business, I have I need a motion to go into executive session regarding pending litigation under 5 ILCS 120/2C11. Need a motion, Mr. Seroy, second, Mr. Olthoff. Can I get a roll call vote, please?
Sure. Mr. Tripp. Aye. Mr. Washington. Aye. Mr. Legess. Aye. Mr. Stauffenberg. Aye. Mr. Vickery. Aye. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Aye. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Aye. Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
For this time, let's
Mr.
make sure.
Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Fairfield. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Okay, well, we're executive session. Note that all county board members are still present from the previous session. Today's invocation is going to be, oh, sorry. I'm just kidding. Sorry. Yeah. Well, with that, I guess that was the last item. Mr. Olthoff?
Motion to adjourn?
Mr. Olthoff with the motion. Mr. Legess.
No second though.
I believe that Mr. Alcott was out of order. Besides that, he has no place to stay now.
Nobody in this room.
My question is, Mr. Chairman, do we have any ordinance or rules that board members continually miss meetings, or do we have anything in the ordinances or resolutions that we can replace these people? I mean, the people that they represent are getting no representation, and apparently they're not going to show up.
No, I've researched that. You have to be convicted of a notorious crime, I think is the word.
A who?
A notorious crime, which is not defined. So I've done that research in the past, and no, there's nothing, only the voters can make that change.
But can't we ask them on the side to resign so you could replace them?
Yes, that is very possible. That can be done, you know, and it has been done in the past. And in the one case, the gentleman refused. But you know, there's really there's really nothing we can do as a board. You can't take any action. There is no recall or any of that other kind of stuff.
I mean, I understand there's an election in the fall, and I don't think either one are running for that, but
Right.
maybe we could just wait till then, I guess.
Yeah. Yep. Mr. Snipes?
You know, I think with DCFS, if a parent doesn't show up to take care of their kids, there's something that happens, and I wonder politically if a official don't show up to take care of their constituents, almost if that can fit up in the notorious, because it's a crime if a parent doesn't do it. So for equal protection of the law, can we not argue the same, because a group of people are being disenfranchised because of a ADC or APC at the politician cut program, you know, where they just leave. So, I mean, just an argument.
No,
I make a motion, we adjourn.
Mr. Legess, you're out of order. There was already a motion on the floor. Would you like to change that to a second?
Yes, I'll second.
Thank you. All those in favor? Those opposed? Have a good day.